What was supposed to be a fun boat trip to enjoy fresh seafood quickly became a disaster. A wealthy businessman named David was traveling with his wife Sarah on a luxury yacht. Their crew included 2 experienced sailors, Carlos, who worked for the boat captain, and Roberto, who was both the ship's captain and knew these ocean waters very well. Just before they were about to leave the harbor, Carlos's girlfriend Rosa showed up with shocking news. She told him she was going to have a baby and that he was the father. But instead of being happy, Carlos got angry and said the baby wasn't his. Rosa became furious and slapped him. Carlos hit her back, and everyone on the boat saw this ugly scene happen. Before leaving, Rosa warned Carlos that his lies would come back to hurt him someday. The tension didn't end there. During their first dinner on the boat, David showed his true colors. He was very arrogant and rude, looking down on Carlos because David had lots of money, and Carlos didn't. David kept making mean comments, but Carlos tried to ignore him and went to read a book instead of fighting. That night, Carlos could hear David and Sarah laughing and having fun in the room next to his, which made him feel frustrated and lonely. Meanwhile, back on land, Rosa was doing something very strange and scary. She was performing some kind of dark magic ritual, as if she was trying to cast a spell or curse on someone. Around the same time, Carlos suddenly got a nosebleed for no apparent reason. He thought it was just a coincidence, and didn't worry about it. But the next morning, he and David got into another big argument. The captain had to step in and told Carlos that if he didn't behave better, he would lose his job. Carlos was so angry and fed up with everything that he decided to quit his job right then and there. In his frustration, he accidentally dropped a cloth napkin onto the boat's gas stove, which started a fire. Nobody noticed the fire at first, and by the time they realized what was happening, it was too late to stop it. Everyone rushed to get into the emergency lifeboats, but a terrible storm hit at the same time. The strong winds and big waves separated all the lifeboats from each other, and each person ended up alone in the dangerous ocean. Now we come back to the beginning of the story. Sarah found herself washed up on a deserted island, completely alone and scared. She had no idea where her husband David was, or if he was even still alive. She spent her first day just sitting by the water, trying to figure out what to do next. Soon, she saw a dead body floating near the shore. It was Roberto, the boat captain, who had drowned in the storm. This made her realize how serious her situation was. But then Carlos appeared. He had also survived and made it to the same island. Even though they had witnessed the ugly fight between Carlos and his girlfriend, and despite all the tension on the boat, Sarah and Carlos decided to work together to survive. They built a simple shelter using branches and leaves, and Carlos taught Sarah how to catch fish for food. When the nights got cold, they slept close to each other to stay warm. As the days passed, Carlos also taught Sarah how to swim better, which helped her feel more confident in the water. For a while, they worked well as a team and started to trust each other. Sarah began to see that Carlos was actually a kind and helpful person, very different from how her husband David had treated him. One day, while Carlos was out looking for food, he discovered something surprising. David had also survived the boat accident and was stranded on a small rocky area surrounded by water. Carlos rescued David and brought him back to their island camp. Sarah was incredibly happy to see her husband alive, but David was not happy at all about how close Sarah and Carlos had become. David was a very controlling person who didn't like sharing his wife's attention with anyone. However, David did have one useful thing: a lighter that had somehow stayed dry during the accident. This meant they could finally start a fire to cook their food properly and stay warm at night. But instead of being grateful for Carlos's help in surviving, David became more and more suspicious and jealous. He started accusing Carlos of trying to steal his wife and said mean things to him constantly. Eventually, David decided he didn't want to share the shelter anymore. He built his own separate. When Carlos discovered his glasses were missing, he became furious. He grabbed his spear and went to confront David, ready to fight him seriously. Sarah had to step between them to prevent violence, but the situation was very tense and emotional. It was during this emotional moment that Sarah and Carlos first became intimate with each other. When David returned to camp with a fish he had finally managed to catch, he immediately sensed that something had changed. He had expected Carlos to be angry about the stolen glasses, but instead, Carlos seemed calm and peaceful. David realized what must have happened between his wife and Carlos. This was the final straw for him. In his rage, he dragged Sarah to Carlos's tent and told her she could stay with Carlos if that's what she wanted. Then David stormed off to set up his own camp far away from them. As the days passed, Sarah and Carlos grew closer and happier together, while David became more and more isolated and bitter. He spent his time alone, watching them from a distance and planning his revenge. David was convinced that Carlos had stolen his wife, and he couldn't accept or forgive this. 5 months went by, and the 3 survivors were still stuck on the island. During this time, David had finally learned how to take care of himself. He made his own fishing tools and could catch enough food to survive. One day, while swimming underwater, he made an incredible discovery. There was an old boat sunk beneath the waves. This sunken boat represented their chance to escape the island and return to civilization. But David didn't want to share this discovery with Carlos. He secretly began working on fixing the boat, planning to leave Carlos behind and escape with just Sarah. However, Sarah learned about David's secret plan. She suggested to Carlos that they should steal the boat and escape together, leaving David behind instead. Unfortunately, David overheard them making these plans and prepared to stop them. The next day, when David went out to look for food as usual, Sarah and Carlos tried to take the boat and escape. But their plan went terribly wrong. The boat began sinking almost immediately, and they realized that David had sabotaged it on purpose. He had wanted them to try to steal the boat, so they would drown in the ocean. Sarah and Carlos barely managed to swim back to shore before the boat sank completely. When they returned to the beach, David was waiting for them. He attacked Carlos with a spear and kidnapped Sarah, leaving Carlos wounded and weak on the beach. That night, despite his injuries, Carlos gathered his remaining strength to rescue Sarah. He found David's camp and fought him again. Once again, Carlos got badly hurt in the fight, but this time he managed to save Sarah, and they both ran away into the jungle to hide. The next day, David found them again and threw his spear at Carlos. Sarah tried to protect Carlos by standing in front of him. At the same time, far away from the island, Rosa, Carlos's ex-girlfriend, was performing another dark magic ritual. It seemed like her voodoo curse was finally working. In the final fight between Carlos and David, something tragic happened. As Carlos was trying to defeat David once and for all, he accidentally fell onto David's spear and was killed instantly. David had won, but at a terrible cost. 1 year later, a rescue boat finally arrived at the island. The family on the rescue boat found Sarah, who was still deeply sad about Carlos's death. David was out fishing when the boat arrived, so Sarah made a quick decision. She decided to leave the island with the rescue boat by herself, without telling David they had come. As the rescue boat sailed away, David saw it in the distance and realized what was happening. He cried out desperately and tried to swim after them, but it was too late. Sarah left him behind on the island, completely alone. The movie ends without telling us what happened to David after that, whether he was ever rescued or if he spent the rest of his life alone on the island. The story shows how jealousy, pride, and the struggle for survival can bring out both the best and worst in people. What started as a relaxing vacation became a tragic tale of love, betrayal, and revenge that changed everyone's lives forever.